My name is Ethan, and I never thought I would be the kind of person who falls in love with his roommate. I always believed that kind of thing only happened in movies. The slow realization, the stolen glances, the moment where everything changes and you could never go back to the way things were before. But life has a funny way of writing stories that feel too real, too raw, and too beautiful to have been invented by anyone. It started 2 years ago in September, when the leaves were just beginning to turn gold and the air carried that first soft chill of autumn. I had just moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a brick building near the university where I was completing my master's degree in literature. The place was modest. Old hardwood floors that creaked in the middle of the night. A kitchen window that looked out onto a fire escape covered in someone else's forgotten potted plants. And walls so thin you could hear the neighbors arguing about what to watch on television. But it was mine. Or rather, it was ours. I had found the roommate listing online. His name was Daniel. He was 24, 1 year older than me, a civil engineering student, finishing his final year. His profile photo showed a broad-shouldered guy with dark brown hair, a relaxed smile, and the kind of easy confidence that some people are just born with. He had written in his bio that he was tidy, respectful of shared spaces, and that he liked cooking on weekends. I remember thinking he sounded almost too good to be true. We met for the first time on a Saturday morning. I had arrived early and was still unpacking boxes when I heard a knock on the open front door. And there he was, taller than I expected, wearing a gray Henley and jeans. Holding a cardboard box under one arm and a duffel bag over his shoulder, he grinned when he saw me and said, "You must be Ethan. I'm Daniel. Sorry, I'm a little early." I told him it was fine. That I was glad he was there, and we spent the rest of that morning carrying things up for flights of stairs and slowly assembling the furniture we had each ordered separately. By the time the afternoon came, we were sitting on the floor of the living room, eating pizza straight from the box, too tired to do anything else, and laughing about the fact that we had somehow both bought the exact same style of black bookshelf without knowing it. That was the beginning. And for a long time, it was just that. A beginning of something ordinary. A friendship. I want to be honest with you, because this is a true story, and it deserves honesty. I knew I was gay. I had known for years, had come to terms with it quietly and privately. Had told a handful of close friends, and eventually my mother, who had cried briefly, and then asked if I wanted tea. I was not hiding it from Daniel. I simply had not found the right moment to mention it. The way you might not mention any personal detail in the first few weeks of knowing someone. Daniel, from everything I could observe, was straight. He mentioned a girl named Claire once in passing, someone he had dated in his 3rd year of undergrad. He talked about her warmly, but with a kind of distance that told me it was over, and he had made peace with it. He never talked about men. He watched sports on Sunday mornings, could name every player on 3 different football teams, and had a habit of leaving his shoes exactly 2 inches inside the front door no matter how many times I gently moved them. He was, in almost every visible way, the textbook definition of a relaxed, uncomplicated, heterosexual young man living his life without drama, and I, completely against my better judgment, began to fall for him. It did not happen all at once. It crept in slowly, the way cold air comes under a door. It was in the small things. The way he would always make 2 cups of coffee in the morning without being asked, leaving mine on the kitchen counter with just the right amount of milk, because he had simply paid attention to how I made it once and remembered forever. The way he laughed genuinely. From somewhere deep, when I read him a ridiculous passage from whatever novel I was analyzing that week. The way he would sit beside me on the couch during thunderstorms. Not because he was afraid, but because he once said, casually and without any weight to it, "I don't think anyone should have to sit alone in a storm." I told myself it was nothing. I had crushes before. They passed. This would pass too. It did not pass. By December, 4 months into living together, I had constructed an entire internal architecture of suppression. I was very good at being his friend. I was warm and present and completely normal in every interaction we had. And somewhere underneath all of it, that I was carrying something I had decided I would never say out loud. night it changed. The night this story is really about happened on a Thursday in the middle of February. I had been unwell for a few days. Nothing serious, just the kind of exhaustion that comes from overworking yourself through a cold, too many late nights reading. Too many cups of tea substituting for real meals. Too many hours sitting at my desk in the small pool of lamplight while the rest of the apartment went dark. Daniel had noticed. He had been quietly checking in on me in the way he did everything without fanfare, without making it a production. Just appearing in the doorway of my room every now and then to ask how I was feeling. That Thursday evening, I had taken some cold medicine and gone to bed early. My room was dark except for the thin line of light under the door from the hallway. I was somewhere in that soft, half-conscious place between waking and sleep, aware of the sounds of the apartment. The low sound of the television in the living room, the occasional creak of the floor, but not quite present enough to do anything about any of it. I am not sure what time it was when I became aware that my bedroom door had opened quietly. I did not startle. It felt very natural, the way things do in that half-asleep state. As though my body simply registered a presence and decided it was safe. I heard Daniel's footsteps. I knew them by then. The particular weight and rhythm of how he walked crossed the room slowly. There was a pause. Then I felt the lightest possible touch on my forehead. The back of his hand, checking for fever. It lasted only a second. He stayed there for a moment longer, very still. And then I heard him exhale, a slow, careful breath, as though he was making sure not to wake me. And then he walked to the other side of the room and did something I would not understand until morning. He pulled the extra blanket from the chair in the corner, the old navy blue throw that my mother had given me, and laid it over me gently and slowly, tucking the edge near my shoulder with a care that felt almost unbearable. Then he stood there for a moment longer, and in my half-dreaming state I thought I heard him say something very quietly. So quietly, I could not be sure I had actually heard it. He said, "I don't know what to do about you, Ethan." Then he left, pulling the door closed behind him with the softest possible click. I lay still in the dark for a long time after that. I was not sure if I had dreamed it. I went over it again and again, just trying to separate what had been real from what the medicine and the fever and the half-sleep might have invented. The blanket was real. I could feel the weight of it. That much had happened. The next morning I woke up feeling better. The fog of the cold had lifted slightly, and I lay in bed for a while before getting up, thinking about what I had heard, or what I thought I had heard. When I came out to the kitchen, Daniel was already there, making eggs. He looked up when I walked in and said, "You look less like you're dying." That's progress. I sat down at the kitchen table and watched him cook, and tried to figure out what was real. He seemed completely normal, relaxed, comfortable, the same as every other morning. He slid a plate in front of me without asking if I wanted any, and poured me coffee and sat down across the table with his own breakfast. And we talked about ordinary things. The weather. A project deadline he had coming up. Whether the grocery store would have good avocados that week, at no point did he mention. The night before, I did not mention it either. I was afraid of what would happen if I did. I was afraid of misreading something innocent, a kind gesture from a friend, and turning it into a conversation that would make everything between us uncomfortable and strange. I had lived with Daniel for 5 months by then. He was my closest friend in the city. The idea of losing that, the idea of creating distance between us over something I might have half-dreamed while on cold medicine, was more frightening to me than the uncertainty, so I stayed quiet. And the days passed, but something had shifted, and I could feel it even if I could not name it precisely. Daniel seemed, and I want to be careful here because I know how easy it is to project, he seemed more aware of me. Not in a way that was uncomfortable, but in a way that was attentive. He would look up from whatever he was reading and catch my eye for just a second longer than usual before looking away again. He found reasons to be in the same room as me more often. One evening, we were both on the couch watching a film, and I fell asleep. And when I woke up, he had turned off the television, but left the lamp on low and put a cushion behind my head at some point without waking me. He was in the kitchen doing dishes when I came to, and when I said sorry for falling asleep, He just shrugged and said, "Don't be. You needed the rest." 3 weeks after the night I have been telling you about, we had our first real conversation. It was a Saturday night. We had both stayed in. Daniel had declined a plan with some friends from his program, and I had not had any plans to begin with. We had cooked dinner together, which we did occasionally on weekends, and then we had cleaned up side by side and opened a bottle of wine that had been sitting on the counter for 2 months waiting for a reason. We sat on the living room floor, not on the couch. I am not sure why, and talked for hours about things we had never talked about before. His family, his father, who was a quiet and proud man who had never quite understood what Daniel wanted from his life. My mother. In the afternoon, I told her I was gay, and the way she had eventually, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely come around. He listened to all of that without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "She's lucky to have a son who was honest with her, even when it was hard." I looked at him. He was looking at the wine glass in his hand, turning it slowly. I said, "Were you listening the night I was sick?" He looked up then. His expression was very still. I said, "The night you came into my room. I wasn't fully asleep. I heard what you said, a long silence, the kind that has weight." He set his glass down carefully on the floor and then looked at me for a long time. Not with alarm or embarrassment, with something that I can only describe as relief. The way someone looks when they have been holding something heavy for a very long time and have finally set it down, he said. "I wasn't sure if you heard," said. "I wasn't sure if I had imagined it." He was quiet again. Then he said slowly, as though he was figuring out the words as he went, "I have been trying to understand myself for a while now. I don't have everything figured out. I am not sure what any of it means or what to call it. But I know that somewhere in the last few months, what I feel when I'm around you stopped being something I could just put in a box and close the lid on." I did not say anything. I was afraid that if I spoke, the moment would break. He continued, "I've never felt this way about a man before. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't know what that makes me. I don't have a label for it, and maybe I don't need one. What I know is that I think about you more than I think about anything else. I go out of my way to be where you are. I check on you when you're sick because the idea of you being uncomfortable and alone keeps me awake. And I know that you might not feel the same way. And I know that we live together, and this is complicated. But I couldn't keep not saying it." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said very quietly, "Daniel, I have been in love with you since November." He stared at me. I said, "The night you made me coffee for the first time and remembered exactly how I take it, I think that was when I knew." I had been convincing myself for 3 months that it was one-sided. Something happened to his face then. Not quite a smile, not quite tears, something in between. He laughed once, short and disbelieving, and shook his head slowly. "November," he said. "November," I confirmed. We sat there on the living room floor for a while after that, close enough that our shoulders were almost touching, not quite sure what to do with everything that had just been said. It was not a dramatic moment. There were no grand gestures. It was just two people who had been keeping secrets from each other discovering, at the same time, that the secret had been mutual. Eventually he reached over and took my hand. Not tightly, not urgently, just gently, fingers loosely around mine. As though he was asking a question and waiting to see if the answer was yes, I did not pull away. We stayed like that for a long time, talking quietly about smaller things, the way you do when the big things have already been said. You were just learning to be comfortable in the new shape of something. I want to tell you what came after, because the beginning is only part of the story. The weeks that followed were the most beautifully confusing of my life. Daniel was navigating something genuinely new for himself, and I want to honor that by saying it plainly. He was honest with me every step of the way. He told me when he was uncertain. He told me when something felt unfamiliar or when he needed time to think. He never pretended to have more certainty than he had, and I never pressured him for it. We moved slowly, deliberately, carefully in a way that I think was exactly right for both of us. He told his best friend Marcus in March. Marcus looked at Daniel for a moment and then said, I kind of figured something was going on with you too. Daniel came home that evening looking lighter than I had seen him in weeks. I told my friend Priya, who had known me for 6 years, and immediately said, I need to hear everything from the beginning and do not skip any details. We spent 2 hours on the phone that night, and she cried twice, both times. She insisted from happiness. Spring came. The potted plants on the fire escape outside our kitchen window turned out to belong to the woman in the apartment above us, and she began tending to them again in April. And we would sometimes watch her from below while we had our morning coffee. And Daniel would make up elaborate backstories for each plant that made me laugh until I had to put my coffee down. He was as funny in a way that sneaks up on you. Not the loud, performing kind of funny, but the quiet, the perfectly timed kind that catches you off guard and warms you from the inside. By April, he had settled into something that I can only describe as a life. Not a new life, an evolved version of the one we had already been building together, with the walls between us taken down. He still left his shoes 2 inches inside the front door. I still stole the good blanket from the couch without asking. We still cooked on weekends and argued gently about what film to watch and fell asleep on the sofa more often than either of us would admit. But now, when a thunderstorm came, he would sit beside me on the couch, and I would lean into him, and he would put his arm around me, and neither of us would say anything because nothing needed to be said. There is something I want to say to anyone who might be listening to this story from a place of longing or uncertainty. Anyone who knows what it feels like to love someone and be afraid that the love is not going anywhere, that it will simply live inside you quietly and never be answered. I was there. For months, I was there. And I want to tell you that I know how heavy it is. I know how many times you can talk yourself out of hope and back into it again in the space of a single evening. I know how it feels to sit across from someone you love and have an ordinary conversation and carry something extraordinary underneath it the entire time. I also want to tell you that what happened to me, this story I am telling you, is not the only kind of happy ending. Daniel's journey was his own, and not every person you love will meet you where you are. Sometimes they won't. That is one of the truest and hardest things about being human. But your love is not wasted by being real, even when it is not returned. It means something, regardless. What I found in our apartment in those ordinary mornings and rainy evenings and late night conversations on the living room floor was that love does not announce itself grandly. It does not arrive with perfect timing or obvious signs. It arrives quietly. It arrives in a cup of coffee made just the way you like it, in a blanket laid over you in the dark, in a sentence spoken so softly you almost have to decide whether or not you heard it, in someone saying, I don't know what to do about you, and meaning it as the most honest thing they have. Ever said Daniel and I have been together for over a year now. We still live in the same apartment. The one with the creaking floors and the thin walls and the fire escape garden that belongs to the woman upstairs. We have talked about what comes next after his graduation. After my thesis is submitted and we do not have everything figured out, we are still 2 people learning each other, making room for each other's complicated interiors. Getting things wrong sometimes and trying again, but every morning he still makes 2 cups of coffee. And he still remembers exactly how I take mine. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the city is dark and the apartment is warm and we are both somewhere between awake and asleep, I think about that February night, the soft weight of the blanket, the careful footsteps, the words I almost didn't hear, and I am so grateful that I did not sleep through it. I am so grateful I was just awake enough.